So, there's this incredibly powerful sermon given on the martyrdom anniversary of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is, of course, one of Islam's most revered figures. And its entire profound argument really hangs on a single title he was given. Let's dive into what that title is and why the speaker argues it changes, well, pretty much everything.
And that title is Owel Mazloom, which translates to the first oppressed. Now, according to the sermon, this isn't just some historical nickname. No, it's presented as a theological key, a key that unlocks a completely different way of looking at Ali's life. It reframes his story not just as one of leadership, but as one of profound foundational injustice. So what does that actually mean? To really get our heads around why Ali is called the first oppressed, we have to start exactly where the sermon does, by redefining the very meaning of oppression itself. You know, when we hear the word oppression, or zulm in Arabic, we usually think of physical violence or cruelty, right? But this sermon argues that true oppression is something deeper, something more cosmic. It's the act of taking something, or someone, and putting them in a place other than their rightful God-given station. It's an act of cosmic imbalance. And here is the absolute core of the argument. The sermon claims that Ali was the first to suffer this specific kind of injustice, that he had a divinely appointed status, a rightful place that was denied to him. He was put in a position far below the one he was meant to occupy. And this, the speaker argues, was the foundational act of oppression, an injustice with consequences that would just ripple out for generations. Okay, so if Ali's status was misplaced by people and by history, how do we possibly discover his true position? Well, the speaker makes a really bold move here. He suggests we need to set aside the historical accounts for a moment. The logic presented is that history, written by fallible human beings, has actually been an instrument of this very oppression, that it's clouded our view of Ali's reality. So to find the real truth, the sermon argues, we have to turn to the one source that's considered completely infallible, the Quran. It's positioned as the ultimate arbiter of reality. And I love this analogy the speaker uses. He says the Quran is like soaked almonds. Just having it in your hand or on your shelf isn't enough. You have to actively engage with it. You have to break it open to unlock the wisdom and guidance that's inside. So let's look at the first piece of Quranic evidence the speaker presents to try and establish Ali's unique station. It actually centers on something pretty interesting, what the Prophet Muhammad asked for in return for his message. So in this verse from the Quran, God tells the Prophet to say to the people, look, I don't want any wage, any payment for bringing you this message, with one single exception. And that exception is a special kind of love for his closest relatives. Now, you might hear the word love and think, okay, that's pretty straightforward. But the speaker makes a huge point here. The specific Arabic word used in the verse, Mawaddah, is not just any old kind of affection. It's something very specific and very demanding. And this distinction is absolutely crucial to the whole argument. Mahabbat is presented as a general love, the kind you might feel for someone because they're kind or admirable. But Mawaddah, the sermon explains, is a different beast altogether. This is a love that is commanded. It's an obligatory devotion, so intense that it demands sacrifice. It's not just affection, it's positioned as the wage, the payment for the entire prophetic mission. So who is this intense, all-consuming devotion meant for? Well, according to the sermon, when the prophet's companions asked him directly, he didn't give a vague answer like, my family. He was incredibly specific. He named just 4 people: his daughter Fatima, his son-in-law Ali, and their 2 sons, Hassan and Hussein. Now, the sermon builds its case with a second piece of Quranic evidence, one that's presented as even more profound, and it's rooted in a famous challenge that took place between the early Muslims and a delegation of Christians. This event is known as Mubahala, and you can think of it as a kind of spiritual duel. It was a high-stakes challenge. Both the Prophet and the Christian delegation agreed to gather their most beloved, their most cherished family members, and then pray for God's curse to fall on whichever side was lying about their faith. I mean, this was the ultimate test of truth. And this, right here, this is the sermon's central proof. The Quranic verse commanding the Mubahala says to bring our sons, our women, and ourselves. So when the moment of truth came, who did the Prophet bring? For our sons, he brought Hassan and Hussein. For our women, he brought his daughter Fatima. But for ourselves, and notice that's a plural word, anfusina, he brought only one person, Ali. So in this moment of ultimate spiritual consequence, Ali literally stood in for the Prophet himself.
According to the sermon, this singular act granted Ali this unparalleled title, Nafs-e-Rasul, which means the Prophet's very own soul.
And the significance of this is just immense, because the Arabic word nafs is incredibly rich with meaning. As the speaker explains, it's not just soul. It can mean your soul, your body, your very reality, your blood, your heart, yourself. All of these deep, profound meanings were now, through this event, directly associated with Ali.
And this is where it all comes full circle. The sermon takes these two monumental Quranic proofs, the obligatory devotion and the title of the Prophet's soul, and ties them directly back to that opening idea of oppression.
So, the argument is this. If the Quran itself establishes Ali as both the object of commanded devotion and as the Prophet's own soul, then to treat him as anything less is the ultimate act of zulm. It is, quite literally, misplacing the soul of the Prophet. This is the injustice, the sermon concludes, that earns him the title of the first oppressed.
And finally, the sermon frames this initial injustice as the source from which all later tragedies flowed. The speaker uses this really powerful metaphor, saying that Karbala, the tragic massacre of Ali's son Hussein and his family, is the ocean where all the previous rivers of calamity finally merge. It draws a direct line from the denial of Ali's status to the suffering of his descendants, leaving the audience to really ponder the incredible weight of that first foundational act of oppression.